Lorcan O'Toole is Director of the Golden Eagle Trust, also Chairman of the Irish Raptor Study Group, and has been involved in birds of prey for a number of years, involved as well with the reintroduction projects by the Golden Eagle Trust, with the golden eagles and white-tailed seagulls being reintroduced, as well as red kites. And his discussion today is going to be on Ireland's lost birds of prey, and the current birds of prey that we have, and also birds of prey that we've lost, and why it's important to bring back some of these lost birds of prey. So Lorcan, I'll give it over to you, and if you want to start, you can go when you're ready.
Great, thanks, Paul. And just for everyone listening in, I'll go through the slides. There's about 50 of them. It'll probably take just under 30 minutes, and then we can have questions and answers. But presentation today is really a kind of a general overview, maybe a step back. I know Paul has had some excellent presentations during the year with specialists who have given very detailed information on various species, golden eagles, hen harriers, buzzards, etc. I think barn owls are coming up, Paul. And really, it's maybe a little bit of a historical look back, and even in terms of conservation, I work with a small charity called the Golden Eagle Trust. We're linked to the Irish Raptor Study Group, and I was just thinking recently, when I started with birds of prey in Ireland, we set up the Raptor Study Group in 1994, and at that time there weren't too many scientists working on birds of prey in Ireland. I think that's changed markedly. I can count at least 5 people now with doctorates working directly on birds of prey, probably another 3 individuals studying for their PhDs. And there's a much greater wealth of scientific experience and knowledge that can be brought to the table. And I kind of served my apprenticeship over in Scotland, and a lot of the bird of prey workers in Scotland said when they started out in the mid-60s, late 60s, there was the same kind of just lack of information and tabulated data. And then all of a sudden there was a flush of really, you have to say, first-rate raptor scientists who came and worked in Scotland. You've already had on one of the world's best raptor experts, Dr. Ian Newton. There was Dr. Jeff Watson, who passed away, unfortunately, Dr. Mick Marquis. So many different individuals in Scotland made a change, and you know, they have a much stronger bird of prey population. As this first poster shows, it was a poster drawn by Gordon Darcy. It was probably, I think the date there is 06. But we were looking at birds of prey in the late 90s and early 90s, and really you had to scratch your head because there were so few birds of prey in Ireland at that time. And we knew from what was happening in Europe and in North America and in Britain, there were opportunities to bring these birds back to an island that had very few birds of prey in the late 20th century. And that paucity or absence of birds of prey was probably there for 100 years, or thereabouts. Some species may have been gone even longer than that. So as I said, with the first picture was kind of a picture drawn by Gordon Darcy in 2006, and at that stage we didn't have white-tailed eagles or red kites. We just started releasing golden eagles. There were 1 or 2 reports of goshawk maybe breeding, particularly in Northern Ireland. The odd sighting of marsh harrier. Ospreys were passing through on occasion. Buzzards were getting a firmer foothold maybe in the eastern part of the island, and some of the other species there you'll see hen harrier, merlin, sparrowhawk and kestrel, long-eared owl, and the barn owl, of course. So they were some species that were here at that stage, but others weren't. This is just a rough table, and these are probably this table is somewhat dated. The top line there is probably Iceland, but Ireland at that stage had 6 breeding birds of prey and maybe 2 regular breeding owls, which are birds of prey, but maybe you'd call them nocturnal birds of prey. So in comparison to other countries, we're very, very low. And that wasn't because they weren't native birds of prey here. It was because we had more bird of prey extinctions than on any other country by a considerable distance. In Britain at that stage, there may have been maybe 14 bird of prey species in Britain. As I said, we had approximately 6. Now, look, you could include goshawk, or 1 or 2 pairs. In the early 70s, there might have been a Montagu's Harrier breeding in Wicklow. So there were sporadic pairs, but nonetheless, in general, Ireland was far behind other European countries. And this was another poster we did again, artwork from Gordon Darcy. There was text with it. And it helped us to kind of visualize what we should consider as birds of prey. And if you were to take a snapshot in the 1990s and say, these are Ireland's birds of prey, you were going to be out by a considerable distance. And the question, I'll touch on it briefly over the next 20 minutes, is how far back do you want to go? But equally, if you take out the top of the food chain, you are leaving a big gap in that food chain for other lower or middle predators to fill that gap. And I would suggest no one's actually done any work on it. But I would suggest it would have been an ideal research project 20 years ago to look at hooded crow or magpie densities before buzzards came back into their native country, because I'm sure crows, hooded crows in particular, and magpies filled the niche that had been vacated by buzzards. I've hosted a number of European bird of prey and bird watchers up in Donegal, and they've often commented, oh, crikey, you've an awful lot of corvids here, but I don't see many birds of prey. And that was a common theme that people would notice when they came to Ireland. So in the top right-hand picture, or side of the poster, you have the 2 eagle species, white-tailed eagles and golden eagles. And then maybe if you come down onto the next row, you have red kite and buzzards. We didn't put in things like rough-legged buzzard. Though the attested evidence is not there, I would strongly suspect that we've lost honey buzzard in the past. And if you go a little bit on the top line of 4, the 2 birds to the right, the 2 hawks, goshawk first and then sparrowhawk. And then if you come down a bit, you'll see osprey, a long extinct Irish bird. You have hen harrier and maybe Montagu's harrier and marsh harrier. And these, marsh harriers were said to be one of the commonest birds of prey in Ireland in the 18th century. We've put in snowy owl there. It was really a one-off event. They did breed in Glenveigh National Park in the year 2000. And we've also got short-eared owl, long-eared owl, and barn owl. Short-eared owls are turning up, and they have bred here in low numbers each year, on and off. And then in the last set of pictures there of Irish birds of prey, we've got our falcons. So we've got peregrine on the left. Ireland has a very important population of peregrines in European terms. Kestrel numbers seem to be in decline, and Sinead Cummins mentioned this at a conference over the weekend, that there's quite a lot of concern now for kestrels in Ireland. The hobby is a species that would have bred here in the past, and our merlin numbers, they're very elusive, and we don't have a very good handle on what is happening in terms of the national merlin population. But that would show you the kind of variety of birds of prey we have. When I was growing up, at least, the sparrowhawk and kestrel were your birds of prey. You might have occasionally heard a long-eared owl. I would have heard nice stories as a child about hen harriers in different parts of the country. I didn't come across them as a child. Buzzards were more or less absent. They would have been breeding, I suppose, when I was growing up in Antrim and maybe down, but they weren't really breeding in Ireland. They might have touched into Wicklow and then died out again, and then they made a greater resurgence into Wicklow from the 1990s. So Irish bird of prey populations have changed considerably in the last 30 years. Some from natural expansion from populations in Britain, and obviously the 3 reintroduction programs have brought back the 2 eagle species and kites. I threw this up more out of just nostalgia than anything else. It was a very crude list of species, native species in Ireland and their numbers. And you can go all along the left-hand columns there, and the 000 from honey buzzard, kites, the 2 eagle species, marsh harrier, osprey, hobby, short-eared owl, goshawks, as I said, coming and going. Merlin and hen harrier were two of our important Annex 1 species, as were peregrine and barn owl. Buzzards were creeping in at that stage. We didn't really have an awful lot of information on long-eared owl. And then kestrels and sparrowhawks were by far the two commonest bird of prey species in Ireland at that stage, and continue to be so. But I think buzzards, if you look at some of the populations across European countries, buzzards would be more numerous than kestrels and sparrowhawks in many countries in Europe. And in general, across Europe, they're actually more numerous than sparrowhawk or kestrel. And I think that would be a big surprise to people who've grown up, spent decades in Ireland, haven't seen a buzzard, and then all of a sudden over the last 10 or 12 years or so, they've started to see these buzzards and they're scratching their head saying, what's going on? And it's really difficult to see how much the landscape has changed. And as the landscape has changed, and because we're not familiar with birds of prey, we just don't gauge the level of loss that we've had in terms of birds of prey. And I would add that other species, particularly large birds, and you can go through capercaillie, bittern, crane, possibly black grouse, though it was probably lost a long time ago. Again, the evidence is not concrete in that regard. But we have lost a lot of big birds, and for a variety of reasons, with different habitat loss, like woodland, we've lost an awful lot of native woodland passerines. And if you go to Britain, it's a real joy to see redstart and woodlark and nuthatch and the greater spotted woodpecker are making comeback now. But suppose in the late 19th century, in the early part of the 20th century, Ireland had as low a population, a range of bird of prey species in general, as it's probably ever had. And human actions, whether deliberate or circumstantial, i.e. habitat loss, had a huge impact on our native bird populations. This is, I won't be filling the talk now with tables, but it just sets a little bit of a kind of a backdrop to what we're talking about tonight. The kites became extinct from the 1750s onwards. There weren't great ornithological or bird records until approximately the 1850s. So you'll say, how come we don't know exactly when ospreys and kites disappeared? We simply don't, because the records aren't there. And it can be confusing trying to pinpoint a decade or even a year that the last bird of prey of a particular species bred in Ireland. But as we go into the 19th century, the records are somewhat tighter and more numerous. And we know, and it's pretty well documented, that the buzzards became extinct around the 1890s, white-tailed eagles just at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, golden eagles last bred 1912, marsh harriers had hung on to 1917. So you can see over that period, and I would say that kind of, how will we phrase it, the anti-bird of prey era probably lasted for about 250 years. And I think if you look at some European countries, look at our history and look at the British history, it seems to be that some of this anti-bird of prey ethos was coinciding with a lot of changes in land management, particularly maybe from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, when game shooting became a bigger hobby of the landed gentry. And this is well recognized now in Britain, where the landed gentry would have deliberately taken out, they'd call things hooky-beak birds. And, you know, we still hear that terminology creeping into discussions about vermin. What is vermin and what isn't vermin? What's natural? It's like, you know, is a weed a wild flower or is it a weed? And some of those attitudes displaced much earlier attitudes where there would have been a greater respect for different bird species, different mammals, and including, you know, bird of prey species. So that attitude and public attitude waxes and wanes. And rather than focusing tonight on, you know, the normal conservation criteria you might hear a talk about, the priorities, the threats, the habitat problems that birds of prey face, the laws, the designated sites, the trends and all those population issues. I think it's really important at times just to step back and, I genuinely feel that human attitude is the key driver of nearly every policy we write as a nation. Our politicians, our representatives, the bigger sectorial interests that have, let's be blunt about it, have more influence than conservation, they have a public and a private attitude. And the private attitude often reflects the public attitude, the social attitude. And birds of prey for 150 years have had this negativity attached to them. Birds of prey do eat other animals. They do prey on other animals, whether it's an insect, a fish, a mammal, or a bird. Nobody's pretending that birds of prey are vegetarians, but it's the public attitude, I think, that's driven a lot of the losses, and a lot of those losses were down to persecution, and many of the losses maybe were brought to kind of extinction by habitat loss, and that made those remaining populations in vulnerable, should we say, good habitats, the remaining small spots, hotspots for birds of prey, they were more easily persecuted and targeted. So all these issues we're talking about, bird of prey, be rest assured, in an Irish context, it was human attitudes that shaped the populations of birds of prey in Ireland for 200 to 300 years. And I think as we're talking about raptors, and I think buzzards are kind of the litmus test here. They're going to be the lightning rod now over the next 2 decades as to attitudes to birds of prey in Ireland. We've sensed that. We're speaking to a lot of people in hunting organisations, and they're telling us to our face, and in lots of different parts of the country, our members are very concerned about the buzzards. And they are concerned because increasingly they're looking to, I'd have to say, a lot of British hunting materials, the shooting times, and they just simply do not like buzzards. We have to be blunt about this. Buzzards do take medium-sized prey items, whether it's birds or mammals, and because their numbers are increasing, and people cannot believe how common buzzards are in France and Germany, and the hunting organisations don't have problems with them. People here might be surprised. When I worked in Scotland, we went over to former East Germany, Saxon-Anhalt. It's now obviously unified Germany. And the people who were collecting the red kite chicks for us were primarily with a hunting background. The white-tailed eagles that came to Kerry, a number of the people involved in collecting those birds were hunters. The Norwegians would have an interesting comment now on hunting in British and Irish circumstances. They are very mindful that they are hunters. They go out for a single quarry on a given day, and they say there's an awful lot of shooting in Britain and Ireland. And they would draw the line when you're releasing duck or pheasant or maybe red-legged partridge in large numbers, and you're coming into the vicinity of the release site, they regard that as shooting, and they see it as different from hunting. And across Europe, hunters are able to coexist with birds of prey. But on the left-hand column here, you'll have some of the, I couldn't say they're birds of prey, couldn't even in some instances say that they're predators, but nonetheless, hooded crow and magpie in particular will have a large impact on breeding survival rates of certain ground nesting birds, passerines, and so on and so forth. You can control hooded crow under license and magpie. Badgers are also a predator. They're fully protected. Foxes are a predator. Raven are a predator. On occasion, you can get a Section 42 license from the National Parks and Wildlife Service if you feel raven are doing damage to your newborn lambs. Mink, I genuinely don't know what the current number of mink are in the Republic of Ireland. But overall, even without mink, you're looking at maybe 1.5 million of those species that could be deemed as other constraints, shall we say, or other, I'd say, natural impacts on population size. If you go to the right-hand side of the column, those big birds of prey are really, in relative terms, they're pretty scarce. Like, largely driven by the buzzard population, we have a big raptor total of over 8,000 pairs. That will improve and that will increase. And if you add in the kestrels and sparrowhawks, and I'm sure those figures are a little bit dated now, because I don't know that kestrel numbers are as strong as when those figures were compiled, but you really are talking about all birds of prey coming in at about 60,000 individuals. And if you want to compare 60,000 individuals with 1.5 million other predators, and let us remember this fully, if we start taking out one animal because they prey on another animal, where do you stop? I'm told that in China in the 40s or 50s, they started to take out an awful lot of house sparrows and they had a plague of locusts. So, you know, there's an awful lot of our passerines we're familiar with will prey on other animals as well. So that's just maybe to put a little bit of a background to that. I wonder if the bird of prey numbers increase, will there be a decrease in some areas in hooded crow numbers and magpie numbers and how they move around the countryside? The one thing I've noticed in Donegal since the golden eagles came in, where the golden eagles are active, you no longer see that marauding flock of 30 or 40 or 50 hooded crows kind of wafting across a hillside. They're much more wary now in the vicinity of golden eagles. And I think a lot of our corvids in particular have had free rein for a long while. But I'll come back to the likes of buzzards, because there are other, in a natural situation, there would be constraints on buzzards as well by other once native Irish birds of prey. And just to emphasize the point that this is just a picture that was taken in the Midlands by a wedding photographer with a good lens, but he's got some excellent photographs of a white-tailed eagle catching a fish. So the point, let no one pretend that birds of prey don't kill other animals. They do. They will scavenge as well, but you know, they'll take birds, they'll take mammals, they'll take fish, they'll take insects, and a wide range of insects, and people might be surprised at how varied their diet is on occasion. So we are talking, and there's this kind of emotional charge then where you're talking about an animal killing another animal, and that debate will be ongoing, is how we live alongside other predators on this relatively small island. But maybe to go off on a tangent now for a minute and look at some of the habitat issues, I was just not really aware of the fact, and it is a fact, that Ireland at one stage, particularly on the western seaboard, had rainforests. Now, it's not tropical rainforest, it's temperate rainforests. And the map on your right-hand side there shows kind of the bars linking the areas through a calculation of basically the rain days plus the temperatures. And you're most likely to have temperate rainforests to the west of that 1.5, that orange yellowy bar in the middle, down the west coast of Britain. So in Glenveigh National Park, and this is really a guidebook on the left-hand side there, and identifies places like Killarney, Kylemore Abbey, Glenveigh National Park. They were formerly temperate rainforests, and there's tiny, tiny remnants of them left. So can you imagine what the country was like if we wanted to go back 8 or 10,000 years ago? And people have been doing pollen work in different parts of Ireland and looking at how certain tree species declined and were lost, they were replaced by other tree species. And then they see this increase in plants that are really markers of either arable activity or disturbed ground. Plantain would be a very good example. Nettles would be a good example. That's when our ancient ancestors started to turn the soil, and it must have been an incredible amount of work to go from rainforest to a blank landscape that we have now. And obviously birds of prey and the different species they have and the different habitats they occupy reflected that as it waxed and waned. And there are indications in some Irish manuscripts, I'm not sure how much weight people put on them, but they say that Ireland was once blanketed by forests 3 times, as if the population increased, collapsed, the woodland came back, population increased again, attacked the native woodland again, then another collapse, and then a third growth of forestry. And as we know now, up around the year 1800, pollen core estimates would suggest that maybe 1% of Ireland was afforested. Now 1% is tiny. It's almost hard to visualize how few trees there were at that stage, but that obviously had a big impact on woodland species, not just raptors, but some of those woodland passerines I was talking about earlier as well. This is a picture, it was a screen grab from Google Earth Maps. It's showing Glenveigh National Park. I've got the cursor there, I hope you can see it. So this is Lochveigh, Glenlack here. The head of Glenveigh comes up to the public road and you come down towards Loch Barra. With the amount of exposed rock in this area, this is where some of the remnants of the temperate rainforest are. And really, you have to say, this area once was temperate rainforest, and now we have so much exposed rock. And if you go on the Google Earth map, I might go back there, on this area here, where I'm kind of circling, I'm going to show you this close up now. And this is available, and it's very hard to explain, and I don't have an explanation for it. But on the left-hand side there, this is what's available on Google Earth map. You can see these straight lines, they're parallel. They're obviously as a result of human actions. They're dug. The rangers and the ecologists in Glenveigh are just beginning to look at these now. They're always known as sheep drains in the local vernacular or the local narrative. Oh, these were dug in the 19th century, but they're so extensive and they're up in very remote spots. This is quite a steep slope. It doesn't make any sense as a sheep drain, and they're actually quite dangerous. You know, Fiona was on talking about eagles a number of weeks ago, and I remember going out with Fiona and putting out her camera traps, and these ditches are dangerous if you fall into them. That's just a red line maybe to emphasize them, if some of you can't see them on the left. But what impact are those open drains still having on that habitat? So, you know, when we look at the landscape, birds of prey are going to reflect the landscape they were in. This is a honey buzzard. You go to Gordon Darcy's book, Lost Irish Birds, it's not really listed there. You go to the Irish Red Data book, it's not really listed there. There is no concrete evidence that honey buzzards were here. But if you look at the honey buzzards across Europe and their range, there's no reason why they would not have been here. They're a migratory bird. They're heavily dependent on hives, wild bees and wasps. And in the past, when Ireland was wooded and forested, they would have been here. Some of the bird bones that have been excavated from various sites, some of the excavations have had really good documentation of the bird bones, but in Irish archaeozoology, an awful lot of the emphasis is on big mammals, particularly livestock, obviously some of the big mammals as well, like deer and wolf and things like that. But there's probably a slight gap. There's a number of bird bones in the Natural History Museum in Dublin. I've been there looking for black grouse bones in the past, and they really need an expert eye. And you know, the difference between some of these species and the bones they're left behind are quite marginal, and it's a skill in itself. Even the name, this is a buzzard now attacking, as its name suggests, honey buzzard. And there's a really interesting name in Irish, and once you go back to some of these lost species, you might have to go to the Irish manuscripts and data looking for clues of their former occurrence. And there is a word that I've looked at a few times in Scots Gaelic. There's a word Ceirseach, C-E-I-R-S-E-A-C-H, and that stands for skylark. It's one of the names for skylark in Scottish Gaelic. In Ireland, in our own Gaelic, it's Ceirseach can be used for a female blackbird or a song thrush. But if you go back to the word Ceirseach and split it in two, it's a compound word. Care is wax and seach means to plunder. And I'm pretty sure that the word Ceirseach was a name for honey buzzard. People were very observant in those days. As the honey buzzard became extinct, the word was still in the vernacular, and they said, oh, crikey, what's a Ceirseach? The honey buzzard might be extinct 100 years. So in Ireland, they attached it to a smolach or a lundu, a female blackbird or a song thrush. And in Scotland, I'm not actually sure what the Scottish for skylark is. I know in Irish it's fish oak, and it's probably the same. So, you know, I think that's a pretty clear indicator that you wouldn't expect a skylark or a song thrush to be attacking wax combs and basically shattering and marauding and plundering wax combs of bees and wasps. There's another little bird that's absent, and it'd be great to see it return one day. And I think it could, as the British population expands. It's a hobby. Hobbies take, very small birds like martins, house martins, sand martins, swallows, and they also take a lot of dragonflies and other aerial insects. So I don't think anyone would feel threatened by the hobby coming back. They often nest in old hooded crow nests, and they're just such a graceful bird, often associated with wetland areas, but they are tree nesters. So again, you can understand in big wetland areas, there's no nearby trees, and slowly but surely, the hobbies were lost from here. There's a debate about their names and what they were called in the past. They were documented that they were exported from Ireland in the past by medieval falconers, but you can see what you might call a mustache there on the facial features, and there is a word in Irish, fauchún, cuille, and fauchún can mean mustache. So it looked like the mustache bird of the forest. Now, other people might say peregrines could have once nested in woodland areas. We have a picture of peregrines nesting on cliffs and crags and human structures like cathedrals and church buildings and derelict buildings. But I remember in Scotland in the 90s helping Roy Dennis collect birds that were going back to Bavaria, and they were being hacked back into little platforms in the woodlands there because they used to nest in trees in old raven nests. So fauchún cuille might be a hobby, or it could be an old period when peregrines were nesting in woods. This is a picture that the late Richard Evans did based on evidence he could find in old manuscripts and place names of sites in Britain and Ireland that had both white-tailed eagle and golden eagle. And this is around 500 AD. And if you go down further, this is much more recently, around the 1850s or so. So you can see the population has shrunk considerably. And that's one question we can ask ourselves, like, how far back in time do we want to go? And I'm not sure we necessarily have to go back in time, but we can look at the possibilities. And if you look there at Ireland, there would have been golden eagles and white-tailed eagles in those mountain ranges in southern Munster, the Cumra's, the Galtymores. There would have been golden eagles and white-tailed eagles in the Wicklow Mountains. Golden eagles and white-tailed eagles breeding over there in Mayo and Galway. And Antrim obviously has a cluster as well. And at some stage, the white-tailed eagles from Kerry, they're already up as far as Connemara and Lough Derg. They will come further north and come into Donegal. So, it's curious when you look back and the change, and these eagle species were breeding in lowland areas. Then they got pushed to more remote areas. And look, I don't need to put up a map with blank spaces in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, because they did become extinct. So we can see that things have changed over time. The other aspect of birds of prey, and I think we sometimes miss out on it. This is a poisoned white-tailed eagle that was collected in the Blue Stack Mountains in 2012. She had a satellite tag on it. I think the guys down there, Alan Mead, called it Fiadna. It spent a lot of time around Glenveigh National Park. So this is a satellite tag, gave the information where it was in the poison glen. Sorry, in the Blue Stack Mountains over by the Crows. I went out and collected it, and MPWS and the Gardaí did a really good follow-up. They made their presence known very clearly in the area. And we had a rough idea who was responsible, but obviously there was no evidence. But I want to show the picture because you'll see this large bruise over its eye of the dead bird. And that injury actually happened in Glenveigh, and it's pretty well documented. In early January in 2012, there was a group of walkers from Derry walking down through the Glen of Glenveigh towards the castle. On the 8th of January, they heard a bit of a kerfuffle above the canopy. It was obviously the winter time. There's no leaves, but there was obviously a lot of branches. Couldn't quite see what was happening through the bare canopy. And all of a sudden, this individual bird fell through the canopy and fell to the ground next to them. And they went over and took a picture of it, not this picture, and proceeded to the castle, spoke to the local MPWS member of staff at had phone. He phoned me, and we went out looking for this bird. We spent an hour and a half looking for it, and we couldn't find it. And we thought, crikey, has it crawled into some boulders and just died? But we knew from the satellite tag data that it was up and living the next day. And all we can assume from the description that the walkers gave, there was a territorial pair of golden eagles in the area at that time. And golden eagles can be very aggressive in defending their territory. Early January, they're getting ready for the breeding season. And we must think that they hit this bird in the head with a closed talon and basically knocked it out unconscious. And it fell to the ground, regained consciousness, probably walked away a little bit groggy, and within a day or two it was flying again. So there is a mechanism amongst birds of prey to regulate their own numbers. And I think at the moment with buzzards, for example, in the continent, buzzard numbers are regulated by eagle owls and goshawk in particular. So maybe just to get to the cut to the chase of the talk, I'm sorry if I wound on too long there as a backdrop to birds of prey. But this is the red kite. It's just, I'm going to go through some pictures now. So the red kite is, you know, they have been re-established in Wicklow. They're doing quite well. They were brought in initially in 2007, and birds were brought into Northern Ireland at the same time. We're very grateful to the Welsh Kite Trust at the time, who was providing these birds for a joint operation. I think it was a good example of kind of north-south cooperation with the kites. They've done very well in Wicklow, and they've also been released in North Dublin. And there's one individual there in the North Dublin Regional Gun Club, and he's such a solid supporter of this project. And we're really grateful for all the individuals in Wicklow and Dublin both from the hunting communities who support this project on a day-to-day basis. There's a picture of a red kite nest, and it's just fantastic to see that they can breed now in Ireland again. There was an old name for kites in Ireland, and Clovan Kirchach, because sometimes they'll bring in rags and bits of old cloth into their nest. And that name must have been a leftover from the early 18th century, and was still in our dictionary, in a Gaelic dictionary, and you see it in the dictionaries. So it's nice that the kites are back in Wicklow and Dublin, touching into Meath, touching into Wexford. And really, kites are very, very, you know, they can breed in a wide variety of habitats, and they should really, in due course, be breeding quite widely across Ireland. This picture here will show that, you know, some kite chicks, and at the top of the picture you can see a number of rat remains in the nest. They also take a lot of rabbits and other food items. They take a lot of corvids, particularly young crows and corvids. So they've got a broad diet, and they'll take a lot of earthworms as well, and they're very fond of carrion, and that makes them very prone to maybe individuals leaving out a poisoned rabbit for a fox. Like the kite doesn't know whether it's poison or not. They just see a carrion item and can land at it quite readily. So this is a quick overview of the kite distribution on the east coast of Ireland, up in County Down, North County Dublin, and in Wicklow. I said the RSB led the project in Northern Ireland, and in the Golden Eagle Trust worked the project with the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Wicklow. And in Dublin, as I said, we're very grateful to Fingal County Council, and there's really a key driver in that North Dublin kite population is an individual in the North Dublin gun clubs, and I'd like to emphasise that. So here's a picture of kites roosting in Wicklow. You see a group of birds of prey. Some people might almost be scared by such an image, but a lot of people now go to Avoca to see the kites in the winter. And if you go near to Avoca Church, maybe in an hour or two before dusk during the winter, you will see a number of kites circling overhead. And the issue, again, really, people are reading certain stories about what impacts the kites might have. Having worked in Scotland with kites firsthand, I know that the gamekeepers are very relaxed about red kites. This is some of the work that Mark Ruddock has done with two individuals. I'm trying to think of Brian's name down in the Burren. And basically, there was two students from Trinity who looked at either the prey remains and the pellets, and they also used cameras. And they were able to show quite conclusively that in Wicklow, the main component of the diet shouldn't be of any concern to the hunting fraternity in Wicklow, because you're looking at heavy emphasis on corvids. It's a kind of collective name for crows, hooded crows and magpies and jackdaws and rooks. Lagomorph, it's again a family name for rabbits and hares, primarily rabbit. We also have pigeons, so you have wood pigeon and feral pigeon. You have other mammals, and some of that might be carrion items on the roadside. You have a lot of it invertebrates. Don't always show up in the in a camera. They're so small, and you won't really see many prey remains. You won't see many kind of wings of various ants or crane fly or whatever. But when you go through the pellets themselves, it becomes apparent how often they are eating insects. And then you do have pheasant there, whether they're squashed pheasant, winged pheasant, and you have large mammals, which would be sheep. Now, a kite isn't killing sheep, but they might be eating parts of the carcasses or the carrion. So again, to inform impacts of birds of prey on whether it's rare birds or game bird interests, it would be important to kind of gather this information rather than going on hunches. The buzzard, as I said, is probably the best example of a naturally recolonizing species. They're spreading now westward. In recent years, they've moved into Kerry and Mayo, which were the last two remaining counties without breeding buzzards. And there's no reason why buzzards shouldn't be breeding in most parishes in the country, let alone counties. But this is a picture of an eagle owl. As I said, they're not confirmed native species, but I'd be very surprised if they weren't. I think going forward, as there's more emphasis on bird bones in previous archaeological excavations, I'd be surprised if eagle owls didn't turn up. And they will definitely limit buzzard numbers. There's a picture of a goshawk. Goshawk, again, that they are breeding in some areas in Ireland. It's quite likely that the goshawks breeding in Ireland are escapees from falconers, that they haven't been part of a deliberate reintroduction, but a lot of falconers fly goshawk, and some of them have escaped, and they can kind of just survive in the wild, paired up with other escaped birds, and then obviously their chicks, survive and breed themselves, and that's how a large part of the British goshawk population has become established through escaped falconry birds. The buzzard itself, it's amazing. I think the general public are so often phone in and they just enjoy the sheer beauty of a buzzard soaring overhead and maybe calling. And they're not familiar with it, or they haven't been familiar with it, because they are expanding across Ireland at this as we speak, and have been doing so for the last 10 years. I remember great excitement maybe finding a buzzard nest. I think it must be 94, 95. The late Jim Hayne, who helped set up the Irish Raptor Study Group, was getting information from the local MPWS ranger called Stockdale that there was a nest somewhere around Ashford. And I was home from Scotland one weekend, and Carl, Jim, and myself went out poking about basically, and we found the nest. And I'm trying to think now, how long ago was that? 25, 26 years ago, and there was such excitement about finding a buzzard nest, and they have increased quite dramatically over that period of time, and I think they'll increase further. There's other birds in Ireland that are of huge conservation concern, like hen harriers, and the Department of Agriculture is behind a very innovative project that you heard about a few weeks ago, again from Reintroduction Wilson Power. And the hen harriers again reflect the habitat that they occupy. What if food is in that habitat? Is there enough shelter? Are there good nesting areas? Has the nesting choice been limited? And as we increase the amount of conifer plantations in some areas, maybe we're bringing hooded crows, and indeed maybe bringing buzzards onto the mountains. Maybe we're bringing pine martens onto the mountains, foxes, and so on and so forth. So this is a delicate balance, and I think the hen harrier project between the farming participants within the SPA is a really good indicator of what can be done. But you have to admit that that's based on a lot of campaigning from the National Parks and Wildlife Service over a long number of years, because it is a big investment in a project. But I think the Department of Agriculture seem to be quite happy with the response so far. So, you know, hen harriers and kestrels seem to be, probably barn owl, I should say, maybe before kestrel. Hen harrier, barn owl, and kestrel seem to be the native bird of prey species that are giving most concern at the moment. The marlin doing fairly well. I think we'd have to put our hands up in the air and say we don't know exactly what the national population is doing. Is it increasing or decreasing? It's possible that as the number of buzzards increase, if there's an increase in goshawk, for example, are golden eagles having an impact on marlin? I wouldn't really think so. Could golden eagles kill a marlin? Absolutely, 100% they could. But I think they'd have to catch a marlin off guard, because marlins are far more agile than golden eagles. So, you know, when you look at other species that we're missing, you could look at, we spoke briefly about woodland species, but we're also missing a number of wetland species. The marsh harrier, there is good news this year that marsh harriers have bred in Ireland. I think the individuals who recorded those incidents might bring more of that information into the public domain. But, you know, they have bred in Northern Ireland in previous years. They were suspected of breeding in the Republic of Ireland previously as well. Ospreys are another species that have been lost in Ireland. They have increased in Britain. They've been released in different parts of Britain, in the north of, or the Midlands of Britain, and now the English Midlands and the south of England. And the Irish Raptor Study Group and the Golden Eagle Trust would be keen to release and help ospreys recolonise Ireland. They should really be breeding here as a wetland raptor. They'd only spend maybe 6 months of the year here before going to Africa for the winter. And they're just a fantastic sight. And, you know, there's an increasing awareness now of the importance of our wetlands, and ospreys could be used to kind of promote our wetlands, as the white-tailed eagles have done. I think it's surprised a lot of people how the profile that the pair of white-tailed eagles had when they nested down by Mount Shannon, the community in Mount Shannon, a village in East Clare, were really have taken white-tailed eagles to heart there. Unfortunately, the female died a number of years ago from avian influenza, but hopefully there'll be a natural replacement for her in due course. The National Parks and Wildlife Service released 10 chicks this year to augment the kind of 6 chicks that were bred in the wild. So the white-tailed eagles, after a difficult start, largely due to people placing out poison down in Kerry, have overcome some of the early obstacles, and there's no reason why white-tailed eagles shouldn't be seen more commonly on our coastlands and wetland areas. There's a picture of Alan Nee. Alan was managing the white-tailed eagle project for the Golden Eagle Trust as the birds were brought in from Norway, and obviously we're very grateful to the Norwegians for helping us do this. When we had our poisonings in Kerry, the Norwegians were aghast that these things would go ahead, and they were asking us to kind of ratchet up the pressure on the Irish government as quickly as possible. But over time, it was clear between the white-tailed eagles, the kites, and the golden eagles that the poisoning laws weren't being implemented effectively, and there seemed to be confusion, and some of the laws and the statute weren't being implemented. So we made a complaint to Europe in 2009, and that helped the Irish government clarify the laws, and the excellent raptor post-mortem database was built on that. But just a little story on that. I was speaking to, he's now a retired member of NPWS management, and telling him over a number of years about a growing frustration with the Department of Agriculture that they couldn't clarify in the public that it was illegal to lay out poison on meat because it would risk killing protected animals. And there was just there was a nervousness, shall I say, on the Department of Agriculture to say that. MPWS, more so the department, were nervous to say it. And I was speaking to the retired MPWS manager, and I said, look, I'm thinking of going to Europe. What do you think? And he said, Lorcan, you have to go to Europe. He says, there's a blockage in government departmental circles. We in MPWS have been trying to get this issue of poisoning corrected for a long number of years, and we're just not getting the cooperation from our governmental colleagues. So that's what we did. We went to Europe and complained, and the response was quite quick because it was quite obvious it was a breach of the Birds Directive. Peregrine numbers in Ireland are doing very well. Ireland we recognise as one of the strong spots for peregrines across Europe. Short-eared owls are coming into various. They have bred on occasion in Limerick and maybe is it Tipperary and possibly northeast Cork. It would be great to see them get a foothold again. Heavily reliant on voles, and those voles maybe in Munster are increasing. They're just such a wonderful bird. Currently, I think, well, as of last week, there was a bird that was fixed with a satellite tag in Scotland that came down through England and then worked its way across Ireland, and it was in Roscommon last week. And again, those satellite tracking images are very useful. This is just kind of a one-off. It's a picture taken by Pat Vaughan from the National Parks and Wildlife Service of a snowy owl up in Glenveigh National Parks. Believe it or not, a pair of snowy owls bred but failed in Glenveigh National Park in the year 2000. And this is a picture of the male near the nest, just to its left, maybe to the right of the picture. As I said, it was amazing to see such a creature breeding in Glenveigh. We don't often talk about rough-legged buzzards. You'd see more rough-legged buzzards on passage in Britain. The Golden Eagle project. This is just a picture of two of the birds taken over from Scotland in Glenveigh National Park prior to release. We had our first chick hatch in the year 2007. There's a picture taken in Glenveigh National Park. And there's a picture of that young in Glenveigh on the wing. It has wing tags on it shortly after release in 2007. They didn't breed in 2008, and then in the year 2009 they nested again in Glenveigh, and this is an artificial platform we erected in Glenveigh. And the bird on the left hand side, as you look at it, red 0, has a small aerial coming out of its back with the female and the other chick to the left of the female to our right. But that chick, I suppose, is very unfortunate. It was poisoned down on the Sligo-Leitrim border. This is it here. You can see Knocknaree in the background there. That's the inlet into Sligo town. And, we wouldn't have been able to recover that bird without the satellite tag on its back. But, you can see the date there, the 18th of February 2010, after the 2009 breeding season. So that kind of, there's an individual in that area, he's known for using poison. He's been boasting about it for a number of years, and himself and his brother kind of throw out poison meat baits in the area constantly. It's very hard to catch them. That's all, circumstantial evidence. But that bird was put into the emerging system as it was at that time between the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the regional veterinary labs and the state laboratory. And that system now called Raptor, it's really an excellent system, and it helps bring the information to the fore. Long-eared owls, it's interesting when people go out listening and looking for long-eared owls, you'll find them. You can see nearly in the last breeding atlas, there's a large cluster around Cork, because there was 4 or 5 individuals around Cork put in a lot of time. But they're fantastic birds, not often seen. There's a great photograph. But there are a lot of long-eared owls about Ireland, probably go under the radar. And there's the kestrel's head, male on your left, female on your right. Their numbers do seem to be declining, and we don't exactly know what all the causes are for that. Is it there was a concern maybe in the past that there was issues with rodenticides limiting their numbers. That could be a problem, but it shouldn't really be a problem in some parts of the countries where rodenticide use might be less prevalent. So I think that there's one or two question marks about the threats to kestrels at the moment. Sparrowhawks, probably one of the commonest birds that people might see passing through the back garden. If you see something dashing along the car, along the hedges, the roadside, more often than not, it's a sparrowhawk. You'll see the colourful male there on the left, and maybe the duller but larger female on the right. And just a wonderful bird, and they kind of have all the traits of a bird of prey. You know, their stealth, they can the speed of attack, and you might often know you only have a sparrowhawk when you see a flurry of kind of pigeon feathers on the roadside, where the sparrowhawk has more so a female has killed the wood pigeon or whatever. So, without trying to answer all the questions related to birds of prey, it's such a range of species. Here's a picture of one of the golden eagles in Donegal. It's the same nest site. You can see the kind of edged flap at the base of the overhang. So this is it on the left-hand side when it's younger, with a fox cub that's been eaten, brought to the nest by the parents. And as it's got older, there's a badger cub that's been brought to the nest by the parents. So birds of prey will come in and they'll take other predators. In Donegal, a lot of the farmers are happy to see golden eagles because they have suppressed grey crow numbers in some areas, and possibly limited to a little degree the number of foxes in some areas. And it's all part of the balance, shall we say, between the higher part of the food chain. This is the bird maybe to look out for, the marsh harrier. You know, there's good signs that they can get a foothold. I can think of so many wetland areas all around the Shannon system and elsewhere where marsh harriers should be breeding, and they're such a graceful bird. And I think they will come back in time. And I don't think anyone would begrudge marsh harriers coming into our wetland fringes. As I said, over time we have brought in white-tailed eagles and red kites. That picture on the top left is just the holes and a mirror used to check the contents of a red kite nest. You can see a clutch of 3 eggs. We're hoping to bring in osprey maybe next year. We're in discussions with local communities and other organisations, licensing authorities about that. It's at early stages so far. Ospreys only take fish, and we have been in touch with the fishing organisations. Ospreys shouldn't be of concern to any farmer or any hunting organisation, and so the angling and fishing representatives we've spoken to are quite relaxed about it. Obviously, the fishing communities in Scotland don't have an issue with osprey. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you have got a marsh harrier there. They're making their own way back, and we would hope in a few years' time that there are more marsh harriers to be seen around Ireland.